You're listening to Agile Ideas, the podcast, hosted by Fatima Abuchi. For anyone listening out there not having a good day, please know there is help out there. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Agile Ideas. I'm Fatima, CEO at Agile Management Office, Mental Health Ambassador, and your host. On this episode, I welcome Phil Gazdinski and Tony Ponton. We have two interesting guests, and they both bring a wealth of experience and insights to the table. First up, we have Tony Ponton, a seasoned expert with over 3 decades of experience in the Agile landscape. Tony's extensive contributions to the Australian and global Agile communities, along with his role as VP of the Remote Agility Framework, have positioned him as a thought leader in remote work strategies and organizational agility. As the co-chair of the Agile Revolution podcast and host of All the Remote Things YouTube channel, Tony offers a unique perspective on navigating complexities in modern work environments. Our second guest is Phil, an individual driven by curiosity and a passion for understanding how organizations function and evolve. With a diverse background in governance, system-wide optimization, and software product development, Phil brings a holistic approach to driving organizational change and building resilient, high-performing teams. He's also co-author with Tony on the book called Governing Agility and co-creator of the Agile Governance Framework and the Remote Agility Framework. Phil is at the forefront of reshaping traditional approaches to governance and fostering agility within organizations. Together, Tony and Phil will share their invaluable insights, experiences, and strategies for navigating the ever-changing landscape of organizational transformation and agile practices. So sit back, relax, and get ready to dive deep into the world of agility and organizational change with our special guests, Tony and Phil. Welcome to the show. All right, well, wonderful. Now that I've done that introduction, Tony and Phil, thanks for joining me.
Pleasure. Pleasure.
This is my first, I would say, out of 150 episodes or so, whatever we're up to now. This is the first three-way conversation, so it's going to be an interesting one. So let's keep it fun, and no doubt we'll get through a lot of content in the next 45 minutes or so.
Brilliant.
Yeah, we'll try not to overlap each other.
It's okay if you do. It's okay if you do. Well, that's probably where I wanted to start. How do you know each other? Because obviously I've just come to know you recently from some of the work you're doing, which we'll get into, but how did you two meet? And obviously we're going to talk about your book shortly, but how did the relationship come about?
Well, how did we actually meet? I've been in the Agile circles, so this is my 3rd decade, let's just say, right? And Phil's been around pretty close to that as well. And give or take. He likes to claim he's younger than me. The overlap of that is we knew each other through the Agile community and got chatting and et cetera, but then we ended up working at the same company. You want to take the story from there, Phil?
Yeah, I think it was actually Agile Oz about 2015 or something in Melbourne. We caught up. We all know all the same people.
Yeah.
Like we've done the same courses and we've worked with the same crew and worked on the same things. So kind of the orbits were very similar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we actually started working together at Elaborate, which is now a CPRO company.
Yes.
Purchased.
Yes.
But working on similar things. So I was a principal here in Victoria and Tony's a principal in Queensland. So we actually ended up working on the same client engagements. So whether specific outcomes, whether it be transformational, potentially governance, which we may speak to at some point today, we ended up teaming up on a few of those. And I think it was during those engagements, those sort of consulting engagements, that we actually started to think about patterns and frameworks and what are the things you can put in place to create that repeatability and what makes sense and what doesn't. And it sort of led us to where we are now.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good representation. And each of us had in saying that like that, each of us had a very long career in thinking about this stuff because, my background, I was one of the original Agile coaches that came out of Suncorp.
Mm-hmm.
So we were obviously one of the first business agility, if you like to call it that. We didn't call it back in those days. And Phil had been doing many of the other organizations that he'd been with as well. So he'd had touches of that. So when we started to coalesce the ideas together, it didn't take much for him to gel. I don't think it was pretty instantaneous.
Shared experience, same problems, different companies, different people,
Shared tips.
same kind of problems.
Yeah, it's really interesting because the problems typically are very similar to how people go about solving them. I'm curious though, in the last sort of, you said about 3 decades, obviously Agile's been around for almost that period of time.
Not 3 decades. Like
Yeah,
Tony.
almost, if you think about that. But what's the biggest change that each of you have seen in the last 3 decades when it comes to Agile?
You want to start with that?
Yeah, certainly we'll go past. So I think we talk about this one a lot, actually. So Agile is a thing, 2001, snowboard, bunch of 17 geeky old software developers kind of wanted to work differently. You can quote me on that. Got together and said, we actually want to challenge the way that we deliver software. And they sort of came up with Agile. So values, the principles actually came later. I think they came about a couple of weeks later, but the principles the values were defined. But it was about small teams and small problems and how can we sort of just get together and fix this little thing. But what we've seen when we think about change over the last 20, 25 years, is Agile's gone from small teams and small problems to actually being about management and how you manage creative knowledge work. And then what do you need to do from a small team to a larger scale, to a program, to a portfolio, to a business unit, to an organization to actually enable you to and give you the ability to manage knowledge workers. So I think that for me has been the biggest change, and we're still not there yet. Lots of organizations will. I think the latest, you see the version 1 reports around Agile and sort of the standish reports, and 94.7% of companies do Agile today, or whatever the latest statistic is. When you dig into it, we've got a team here, and our product team does it well, and we've got a software development sort of center over there that do it well, and maybe we've got some enterprise agility, but most companies don't do Agile well at scale.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of things that constrain that, but there's a shift to try and get into that, take the small things, scale them, and do them at larger scale. I think that's a big shift for me. It's going small to large.
I would concur with most of the things that Phil's saying there, all the things Phil's saying there. But I started in 1999 before it was really even called Agile. So that's the back of that experience, and we were doing history programming from a book. And shout out to those who are listening to this and watching this, Craig Smith and Renee Trout. We were the original Agilists there. What I've seen change since then and flow through too is that want for business agility. It used to be you'd walk into an organization to help them, and it'd be the IT areas typically trying to drive that change, the CIOs and etc.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Now it's really the business that's they're in the driving seat, changing. We need this agility, and we need to find out why we're not flowing. And if you need a stark reminder of that, we had Evan Laybourne at our book launch.
Mm-hmm.
It was, the founder of the Business Agility Institute. And, he was probably saying, the speech was, I think it was 76 countries they're in now. And if that's not a stark, point there that says organizations are looking about how they can do that, yes. I think that's an interesting thing. So that's the big change in there. And then I think the other big change in there that, as Phil said, is as Agilists and as a community, in Agile, I'm quite strong on this. Governing the systems, or governance as we call it, was something that was sort of pushed to the right.
Yes. 100%.
Or it was too hard to tackle in the organisational construct.
Mm-hmm.
And that's left us in a space where we can no longer ignore that anymore. And that's why, we're always talking about it. You can't put your governance in your Agile. You've got to put your agility in your governance. And that's sort of the tagline of the book, because, we've been saying that since we sort of got together. You have to do that, because the minute you start taking that archetypal governance and ramming it into your agility, you disenable your ability to use agility.
Yes. 100%.
And so the change of the conversation now is actually that. We're seeing people, we've been astounded by the reach out to us, because we're seeing that in organizations at the moment. They're struggling with that, and they're asking, how do we fix that?
It's a really good point. So one of the reasons I came across what you were doing, I think we just connected, Phil, you sent me a message on LinkedIn, which we talk about similar things at the moment around governance and Agile. And I know that in the last sort of 6 or 7 years, with particular the increase in the larger banks, the ones that are basically, I would say, spending the most money on Agile and rolling that out, that they've left governance as an afterthought, which is quite interesting considering it's so integral to everything we do. So I can concur with that for sure. When thinking about organizations, and sort of one of the points that you made, Phil, around scale. So obviously that organizations are now trying to make change happen at scale. What do you think they're getting wrong? What are companies getting wrong and then saying that it's not working?
Yeah, I think everyone sets out with pretty ambitious change goals, and maybe that's the first problem statement. And I know it's sort of where I work, we're challenging that a lot, and trying to treat transformation as a capability and a constant thing rather than an end state. I reckon that's probably the first problem. So you kind of come in and you go, hey, in 3 years, we'll be transformed to X. You're almost setting yourself up to fail straight away, which is, say, I think, what is it, 77, 78% of transformations fail. So kind of you set yourself up in the wrong way. We're going to be there. And you put everyone on it, and you put your resources into it, and you get your plans, and you're just measuring yourself to the plan. So I think that's kind of the first one. Instead of that, you sort of treat transformation as ongoing. Here's the 6, 8, 10 things we want to tackle. Here's our backlog of stuff we're going to go after. Here's the first thing. We're going to trial some stuff. We're going to experiment. Then we're going to go to the next thing. And we're going to go to the next thing. And you've got to keep learning and scaling as you go, which I think is a much better vehicle. For me, that's the big one. The other one is, what is agility and what's the outcome anyway? Agility is not a thing. And I think that's the other problem. In 3 to 5 years, we will be agile. Okay, that's not a transformation outcome. In 3 to 5 years' time, we'll be the most customer-centric company in Australia providing these kind of services. That's an outcome. And agility is the enablement thing you want to change to help you get to that outcome. So I think we finally see those failure points where we go, in 3 years, we will be agile as the thing. And that's not the thing. So I think they're probably the two things for me.
Absolutely. Did you want to add anything, Tony?
Yeah, and Phil knows I will. Because I'll pick up on Phil's point about transformational, right? And I think the piece to the question you're asking there is, every organisation starts out with the intent to be transformational when they talk about these things, and we've seen that, right? And we're going to be transformational, we're going to use agile or agility or whatever the term is, but they end up being transitional.
Yes.
And the reason they're transitional is because what happens is they end up with what I call a 3-speed economy, and Phil uses the term as well, right? So the 3-speed economy is really this. They have their systems of strategy and leadership, and generally most organizations have that directional flow. Leaderships have that directional flow. If they don't have that, it's a bigger issue than what we're talking about right now, right? Obviously. Where do they set the transition in place? They set it in place at the team level, at the system of work.
Yes.
Because that's the easy place to set the flow.
Yep.
They can change teams. They can change the structure. They can reline, repoint, restructure. I think I get all the kitsch terms, right? The trouble with doing that is that you reach the complexity ceiling because you're not touching the systems of governance and funding. So you essentially have got them all going at 3 speeds.
100%.
Or sometimes even I have seen it as a 4-speed because your governance is going one way and your funding is going the other. So we've seen that as well, right?
Yes.
And then, you know, to go with it, there's a sort of an extra part of that, which is they don't link the strategic intent to the execution to the strategic intent. So there's not that flow of information. So they're not looking at the governing system as a whole. They may inject agility sometimes into PMOs and VMOs and you know, agility.
Anything MO?
Yep, that one, all those different ones, right?
All the MOs, yep.
But they're not investigated in totality. So each of those are going to fail if looking at that in concert, right? As good as you can be. I've been in an organisation where we've got great adaptive portfolios, but they're muzzled by the complexity ceiling of not having the strategic intent linked and the workflow, etc. So that for me is one of the.
The other one, Tony, while you were thinking, I was thinking about, and we're taking this lens, and when we think about change, and make your comment around systems of work as the trigger. So in the past, what we would have done from a transformation perspective is design the future state operating model. Here's your structure, here's your operating model, pick it up and go, here you go teams, go forth and align. That always fails. Like it never succeeds. Like it does in the short term potentially, but it doesn't succeed in the long term. So the difference is when you go, our outcome is to be different. Here is a pattern we want you to follow to get to it. And here are some constraints we're going to put in, governing or enabling, whatever they might be, we want you to align to. But you go design how you're going to work within that. So start with the first elements. How do they connect? How does work flow between them? What are the next ones? All the time building for independence. So that's probably a different way of tackling transformation as well, which in the past we wouldn't have done. It would just be, let's go get our 3-letter consultancy to come in, design our program, and we'll just transition to that. And you lose agency, you lose ownership, and I think you lose sustainability.
And
Instead, you say, here's an outcome. Yeah, you do design the pattern. You want people to follow to get to that outcome. So so they know the things to do, because people don't know what they don't know. So you want to help them along the pathway, and you want to facilitate the pathway. But at the end of the day, the end design of how they're going to work is owned by the people that are doing the work.
Those pre-canned options, or cookie cutter as I talk to organisations all the time, and I know I'm a consultant, right? But I say to them, if any consultancy comes to you with a pre-canned thing and says, this will solve all your problems, running and don't stop.
Yes.
Because you have to design it to your context. And one thing that I've seen time again, and that's why we're all here, is it doesn't touch the governing systems.
No.
In total. It'll
100%.
let's put lean PMO here, or let's do that.
Yes.
But it doesn't touch the
Or
whole.
let's just call it a lean PMO. I wrote a post the other day saying, just put the word agile in front. Like PMOs today should be agile anyway. Why are we calling them agile PMOs? It doesn't make sense. But it's actually really interesting because it's counterintuitive. You talk about transitional state. Like agile itself is iterative, but then they're trying to run agile as a transformation program, which is kind of, again, counterintuitive. I'm curious though, again, from a consulting lens and the sort of past experiences that you both had, we've seen obviously agile roll in at the team level, but we've probably also seen it at a department level, and then we've also seen it at an enterprise level. Do you think any particular way works better or worse? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, Tony, you can start with that one.
You should see him flick the pass to me then, man, nicely. Look, I think I hate to use the old consultant's answer of it depends. And my reasoning around that is because there is no set pattern for any organisation. You've got to look at the structure of what the organisation is doing. You need to understand the outcomes that organisation wants to achieve, and you want to see the current state of play. So I've actually seen the top down bottom, the top down sort of situation work, because you do need that leadership part of it. And I've seen the organic piece, but for me, the organic piece coming up tends to hit that complexity ceiling. So, and I'll give you my point in taking with that, right? The articles out there at the moment, Jim Highsmith published one just a little while ago with my old leader from my old company, who took that pattern that he used and has taken it to IBM and World Fuels. And the difference when we first did the first agile transformation thing that we did, it lasted for about 2-3 years, but we didn't have the sponsorship. We didn't have that investment of leadership. So therefore, it even though it was having success, it really didn't populate us. Go forward to 2006, and you have a leader who says, we're going to go this way. This is the direction that we're traveling. Hop on this bus, or there's a bus there that you can hop on and go that way. That top down, bottom up is in my mind the way to go, right?
And then speaking of leadership, one of the biggest challenges that I hear often is the fact that leaders don't have time to understand agile, or to do the training, or to get the coaching, or whatever it might be. So what sort of have you seen in that space to resolve that? Or I guess both from a consulting perspective currently, Tony, and then Phil from an internal corporate perspective, how are you addressing that challenge?
I'll let you get that one, Phil, since you flicked
Yeah,
past.
no, it's a good question. So space and capacity are really interesting. So we tend to overburden people a lot, like not just sort of like teams, but also leadership group. We ask a lot of a leadership group, to be aware of not only how you're running the business, but also, hey, you can run it, you also got to change it. And here's our KPIs, and here's our direction. And there's an awful lot of pressure and intensity. I guess what I've kind of found is most of the leadership doesn't really care. It's just, tell me, what do you need to do to work better? What can I give you? How can those decisions or those asks get to me? I think The space ends up being the time to stop and reflect and go, actually, we need that. I need to change that for you. Here you go. Here's something that can, whether it be budget or people or stopping things because we're doing too much or whatever it might be. I think it's that ability as a leader to find that little bit of space and go, my team's asking me for these things. I want that. How can I help them to get to that? So I think we don't allow it a lot with the amount of pressure that goes onto a leadership group. So kind of as a system, we don't. I think what's made it harder is COVID and remote work. So pre-COVID, it was much easier for a leadership group to get the information it needed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's side conversations, 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there. I've walked past your desk. Can I just ask you this question, please? I actually had this conversation this week with one of our senior directors, and he goes, that's how I get my information flow. I solve my problems. I understand, I hear the problems, and I solve them with that 5 minute or 10 minute. I'll help people to solve them. We've lost all of that.
Yeah.
Well, not all of it, but a fair chunk of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think the productivity gains and the benefits kind of balance it out, but the more pressures come on the leadership group because they don't have those interactions anymore. It's timed and it's in a meeting invite. It's in teams. That's why it's kind of hard sometimes for me to get space to do things.
Mm-hmm.
The calendar is often blocked all day.
Yep.
So if you've got a blocked calendar all day as a leader, it's very difficult to go, sure, I'll give you half a day to go learn about Agile.
Yeah.
You're going to sit there and go, I've got these 20 other priorities of things that need to be done and problems that need to be solved. You go do it and tell me what you need. So I think, but I also think from a leadership perspective as well, the questions we ask of the system need to be different.
Mm-hmm.
So leadership groups have been brought up in a certain way of thinking and working, and that's worked for them in the past. The dynamic nature of systems, the complexity, the pace of change, all the buzzwords you can, digitalization, all the buzzwords you can throw in have just made it even more important to ask different questions of the system
Mm-hmm.
and use, and I think this is where kind of, again, we sort of focus on in the book, use the data that's produced by teams in the way that they work to ask questions of the work and be able to go to the work rather than bring things to you.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting one because then I would normally think traditionally, here's a 30-minute slot.
Yes.
I'm going to run a steer code.
Yep.
So people plan for a month and get the
Mm-hmm.
data, information. It's out of date by the time you do your PDF or your PowerPoints, 100-page PowerPoints, whatever it is. So it comes up and then you start talking. You go, yeah, but I wrote that 3 weeks ago and that's changed already. Or we thought we were going to get that done, but we didn't quite get it done. So it's spilled over. So one of the keys, I think, to actually carve space out for a leadership group, help them to make better decisions, is teams using data internally on themselves. Yeah. We don't see that a lot. Yeah. Like a lot of organizations will say we're data driven. Mm-hmm. And it's usually about financials, and management reporting and KPIs and probably even customer interactions and all the data that comes from working with the customer, but it's not performance data. It's very rare to find a really well-structured organization that has good clarity of internal performance data on how we're working and the efficiency of that. I mean, how many people can measure internal efficiency? It's probably not many companies.
It's moving from push to pull for information.
Yeah,
and you talk about data as well. There's probably a lot of different data points that are more invaluable in an agile governance environment. And I'd be keen to, see what your thoughts are on that. And Tony, if there was anything you wanted to add about leadership from a consulting perspective before we talk more about data.
Well, yeah, I've been a leader as well, so I know where they're coming from. And then, basically on the consulting, that's where I work in the leadership space and with what I was saying. But there's a couple of things extra to that, I think, is do you have the time not to actually be involved in understanding how your organization and how your team's going to work? Because what happens is that as soon as you inject agility into your organization, it disseminates control.
Mm-hmm.
That's the intent.
Yes.
But what is the other intent of agility? It's to create information flow, whether that's velocity, that's whatever those things are. It creates information flow in short, sharp cycles. But the speed of that then overtakes leaders, which is what Phil's saying, right? So the other thing that I work with a lot of leaders, I say, and shout out to Dave Martin, who coined the phrase, right, is, are you stuck in execution? Are you doing the things that you don't need to be doing because you need to try and resume that control?
Yes.
So the only lever they have to pull is that command. You must, you should, you would, you have to, right? And so that's changing the frame of how leaders lead. And in the book, we sort of focus on that in terms of calling it conductive leadership. And we use that emphasis, being more conducive. In other words, if you see a conductor, are they doing the work? Are they playing the notes?
Exactly.
They played a part. They played a part in helping to plan where it's going. But the musicians themselves really did that as well, right? Their job is to help it go in the right direction of travel. They make interventions, even though you might see it. Everybody thinks those little sticks waving around the air are all for fun.
Yes.
But, you know, if I pick on Phil's played a bum note, which I would expect, right? And so they give him a double tap to let him know. Now, you don't know that out there, but they made an intervention, a strategic intervention, based on the information that's flowing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's the thing here is how do you make that time for strategic intervention and an expedient intervention based on the flow of information, and that's getting the right information, because as Phil said, data, we call it data-driven reasoning, and there's a reason that we call it that is because we've all heard data-driven decisions, we've all heard data-driven intent, but actually, are you giving yourselves time to take that data and sit down and actually reason against it?
Well, can you share some examples of data-driven reasoning, maybe that applies today, that are really relevant in this environment?
Here you go, Phil. This is you're on. He's so passionate about it.
Oh, I do. So I'll use an example that we talked about in the book, or maybe not. Maybe I was reading something else the other day that I wrote a while ago. So I used to work for an organization a few years back. And we've had a very long planning cycles, like 18-month planning cycles for a yearly plan, basically, when you look at the amount of flow. So we'd go through the planning cycle, sort of get information around where we wanted to go, where we're going to invest in, so on and so forth. And then you would lock it in, budget set, your 12 months is ready. And it was within 3 months that we started to see surfacing of information that challenged what that plan should actually deliver. And the plan actually had to change. But we actually didn't have the systems in place before that and the visibility of that. So a lot of direct customer feedback on usage and sort of where they were, what things they were selecting and what decisions they were making when they were engaging with the product, but never been visible or available. But it's kind of started to be visible or available. So it took 18 months of planning, set a 12-month plan. 3 months in, we started a good customer data come up. So we got to be able to stop and go, actually, our plan is wrong. We actually need to pivot and change our plan. So I think in the past, we haven't had, and like collectively, you think about organizationally, we haven't had the means to peer into things like knowledge work. It's been really abstracted and you're kind of making a lot of assumptions, or it's in your PowerPoint slides, it's in your green status that you get every month. So
your watermelon project or...
Right. Yeah, that's it. We're green. Watermelon. No, you say watermelon. Tony loves watermelon.
And they go one step further. When it gets dropped on the ground and it's code red, it turns into code brown and then it's the fan.
I prefer Kiwi projects, green on the outside and green on the inside.
I like that.
There we go. That's it. So look, I think in the past, we haven't had the ability across organizations to get data in real time.
Yes.
And I guess not just customer data, but our performance data.
Yes.
So now we're at a point, I like some of the work we've done at the company I'm currently with, so it was with Bupa, is we spend a lot of time standardizing how we use our workflow traceability systems, so that we'd have everyone who's involved in change and delivery breaking work down the same way, tracing work through the same way. And it's quite a disruptive thing to do, particularly when you've got so many sort of discrete ways of working.
Yes.
But bringing people onto the system to get that visibility and traceability and consistency. We're at the point now where we can just get a daily snapshot of what was delivered today and what's our efficiency, what's our progress, where's our blockers. We get a good view of committed plans per quarter. What do we deliver in the quarter? What do we not deliver? We get that dynamically. Like it's all coming from a workflow management system. It's all going into Power BI. You can see the things. So you don't have to do status reports anymore. You can go click the button and you actually go into Power BI and you can visualize it, and you can say, I have a question about this. So touch the reasoning bit.
Mm-hmm.
Thought we'd have 12 features done this fortnight sprint, whatever, across the system. We've had 10. Okay, not bad, but let's sort of understand about the 10. We've had 2. Oh, okay. So what's happening in terms of where our delivery is going this quarter or this month, whatever it might be? All the systems are there now.
And it's asynchronous as well, isn't it? It gives people the opportunity that are, and I know you're both big advocates of remote work and, you know, that frameworks that you've worked on in the past as well. So it's not only asynchronous, but it's also just in time information as opposed to the 50-page PowerPoint status update. That's just in case that I dread because it changes every month. And in one large program, I remember there was 40 different reports a month going out that the PMO had to create a team of 3 people. Like,
how do you consume that? You don't.
Right? You don't, exactly. It's just one of the tests I usually tell people is just stop doing a certain report or alleviate yourself and remove a bunch of pages and see if anyone actually pays attention or notices. Whereas with Agile, there's a lot more transparency and a lot more visibility and a lot more accountability. So I'm curious to know, particularly coming from a heavy banking background, how do you balance or navigate the balance between transparency versus the privacy confidentiality piece when it comes to governance? Have you thought about that?
Oh, indeed.
Okay.
You'll notice in the book we call it sensible transparency.
Yes.
And there's a reasoning around it because of that very reason, right? Like we've either all come from, worked in, helped very heavily regulated industries, right?
Absolutely.
And so that level of transparency, sometimes we know that there's transparency that you cannot create because there are certain things that you have to do. So you have to be sensible. So be transparent about what you can't be transparent about to start.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Be transparent about the effect of those things on the effect of the other things. So often people get told, well, just do it.
Yep.
But it's being transparent of the effect of why that is. Okay, there's been a change here. We need to have that sensible transparency, that flow of information. I call it, Phil loves it, but it's the collaborative connective tissues of the organization, right? You're going to
trademarked.
Yeah, that's it. Trademark. But it is literally that. It's the flow of information horizontally and vertically connecting. And it's making sure it's the right information for the right people in the right place at the right time.
Yes.
So that transparently, whatever area of the part of the construct, they're able to make the expedient interventions and understand the interactions of that and what it does to other parts of the organization.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
That doesn't happen. So when you're talking regulative, right, and you have those things, there's still a level of transparency you can provide to the teams and to the organization. The just make it happen kind of mentality, and we've seen that. That just doesn't cut it anymore because it affects the flow of work at the bottom of the table.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes that backflow, we call, that to quote Esther Derby, that bifurcation of knowledge, right? So these guys up here pretty much know where it's all heading one way, and the team down here only knows about where they're heading from in terms of what they're doing. When you start to link the strategic intent to the delivery and you're transparent about the effects of that and why you're making decisions, then that changes the frame of reference for the organisation as well. Even in the governing systems, the lower level governing systems of PMOs and projects and etc., right? Mm-hmm. That changes the frame of reference there.
I love that. I think makes a lot of sense, particularly that sort of being transparent about what you can't be transparent about. Like, it's so simple to think about, but it's something that people don't usually give too much thought to, just like they don't generally accept that governance is not a PMO's job or a governance functions job. It's a enterprise job, and it's up to all of us to contribute to that system of governance.
Yeah, we talk about it as seamless integration.
Mm-hmm.
Your governing systems, it has to be a seamless integration of governing systems and governance into your everyday work. Because if it's not, it becomes a cottage industry.
Yes.
Or humans do human things.
100%.
Humans will find their way around it. Phil, you were going to comment and I spoke.
No, I was going to say it's a good segue to our last extension that we have, which is about humanity. And when we talk about humanity, it's injecting people.
Yes.
So agility is all about being human-centric. So you can't inject agility into your governance unless you have a human-centric lens.
Absolutely.
It's quite interesting. Like Tony and I, it took us a couple of years to work that last one out. I think the first four are pretty easy. Can you see the work? How are you leading the systems? Have you got data? How you designed yourself? You can read that stuff anyway. But it's kind of only by bringing it together with the agility element, which is about people, that you actually connect it all. Because what we lose in a lot of our governance systems is the human element, because it becomes regulatory, becomes process driven, becomes prudential, becomes about reporting. I don't know how many times you sort of get told, I have to do this because APRA want it. And then you go find out and APRA have said no such thing.
Yes.
So the guidance is actually not prescriptive. It's kind of, you tell us what you want to do. So there's a lot of those examples, right? But people use the governance as the thing rather than sort of trying to think about what does it mean from people and the way that we sort of want to interact with work and systems. So that last stanchion is really about people. But we're also pragmatists. So trust but verify is a quote that we use a lot. So yeah, we trust you. Like, again, agility is about building trust across your system. A lot of our organizations are low to medium trust, which is why we have a lot of governance processes and practices and rules and constraints, because I don't quite trust the person over there to do the right thing.
Absolutely.
So you tend to trust a few more people. You want to trust people more, which brings agility and brings humanity into your agility and into your governance. But I'm going to verify.
Yep.
That's why the data is important.
100%.
So I trust what you said. You're committed to do your 6 epics this quarter. Awesome. Come to the end of the quarter. Wait, the data tells me you've done 3. Tell me about these other 3. What's going on there? So you actually, rather than just sort of let people go, yeah, I'm doing my 6 and then move on to the next 6, you want to verify it. Yeah. So that's a key. That's kind of the key anchor, we think, when we think about human element.
And I think when you talk about that trust and you're talking about, so obviously they're all interlinked, right? All of the things we've just talked about, because one without the other overbalances and then you have a problem, right?
100%. Because governance is the glue for the processes, regardless of what your processes are. So I just say it's a glue.
Yeah,
you can't have process without the governance. So
to that point though,
yes, what
we see is a lot of organizations setting guardrails, not guide rails.
Yes.
So, and we use that terminology deliberately because guardrails are, if you think about it in a highway term, guardrails are your last bastion of chance that, you might damage yourself, but you won't go over the cliff.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep, absolutely.
And that's what organizations have done for a very long time, and they're trying to apply that to Agile. So in other words, they're trying to apply governance to their Agile rather than agility to their governance. Right?
Yeah, 100%.
And so they're applying those guardrails that have been built up over the time. We call it organizational detritus. It's, layer upon layer upon layer of that's what we always did. Something went wrong. Let's put 3 things on top of that to stop that ever happening, and et cetera, et cetera. What we want to look at to create that ability to have trust backwards and forwards, because it's a 2-way street, right, is guide rails. And the analogy I tend to use when I'm talking to people about that is if you drive one of the new fancy cars and they've got that guidance system, and the one I always switch off, it drives me nuts, but, its intent is to pull you or guide you back onto the track so you don't hit the guardrails, right?
Exactly.
That's the guide rails. And organizations that we walk into so many times not thought of that humanity factor and that trust factor of where are the guide rails. So what they've done is they've said, well, we're going to centralize it. I'm responsible for everything. That area is responsible for everything, and they're going to govern that, and it becomes a cottage industry. Yes. Whereas the reality is, if you do it close in person, place and time, close to where the people get the work done, to the place where it gets done, at the time it gets done, and you provide them with the right guide rails, they'll make good decisions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I always say that it's not about the who, being often ego-driven, and I know I've been one of them as well, PMO or whatever you want to call it, MO person running it. It's usually about, oh, this is how I like to do governance, this is how I like to facilitate it. So it's not about the who. Then they move to the what, where it's like, okay, governance is this, but governance is governance in any organization we go to, regardless whether it's banking or retail or whatever. Governance is governance. So I always say it's about the how. So how to integrate governance across the organization. But yeah, too many people focus it on the who, and then there's a high turnover in these roles in a lot of companies. And as soon as they leave, new person comes in who might have just as good as ideas, if not better, and then they have to impact delivery where, regardless of how you're delivering, to then try to instill governance again, as opposed to having, that organizational, guide rails that then lead to guardrails around it.
Yeah. And I think if you don't have that, and if you link back to things, and Phil, you can comment on this a moment, but as you link all of that back, what happens is you actually have radio silence. Right?
Absolutely.
And silence is actually the sound of risk piling up. And I hear this all the time that Agile doesn't do risk well, or governance controls risk, but that's the reality of that. It's not true, right? So, if you're doing Agile not well, then it's like bad prawns, you get a bad result. Right? So you have to encompass that. Phil, you want to add to that?
I want to build on that one. The one that gets missed all the time. So, I talk about this one a lot. So it gets my goat. Agility, agile thinking is essentially about risk reduction.
Yeah.
And better risk management. And that's risk of change and risk of delivery.
Mm-hmm.
The whole point of fast delivery, fast feedback, working closer to your customer, all the principles that are applied is to de-risk change.
Yep.
And we lose a lot of that in sort of it's agile and sort of the fluffy stuff that goes with it. But right at its heart, it's literally about risk management and better risk management. You change your system of work, you've got less risk in your delivery.
So then the question becomes, now going back to obviously the book you've written around governing agility, how do you balance the need for agility with the requirements of governance within an organization, which is often the challenge, which is why it's probably been an afterthought for many of those agile transformations that we've seen?
I think that's because they treat it in separation. You have to treat them symbiotically.
Yeah.
They go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've been responsible, Phil and I've seen this over the years, is how we formed this opinion. And I've been responsible. I take it right on. I was one of those gung-ho agilists back in the 2000s saying, well, we don't need to worry about that. Let's just get this agile thing and deliver this stuff because we can, right? Then worry about the governance. We've got a governance group who does that stuff, right? So that might strike a chord with some people. But the reality is, it's that, again, seamless integration. It has to be symbiotic. We're governing of the system and the agile mechanisms and agility in itself are working together. So we talk a lot about, moving from the left to the right, from long tail planning and that traditional stuff into short cycle. So even if you think about it, organizations have wound themselves out where they've sort of thought about the agility thing and they get to this quarterly planning type thing. Whether that be, there's different scaling methods, whether it be PI or whatever it be, right? I'm not poking at anyone particularly, but the reality of it is quarterly planning is about as useful as a box full of hammers now because of the VUCA that we have out there, right? And the reality of it is by the time they set the quarterly plan in place, they come back to the team and of course they've got their risks and they've got their dependencies and blah, 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 but they come back and they start the work. The sands have shifted, therefore the risk has shifted.
Yeah.
Therefore the agility shifted. And therefore your governing systems are null and void. So you actually have to work them symbiotically. And the shorter wave and shorter cycle that you can plan, prioritize, work in, the shorter the cycle of flow of information that allows you to manage, as Phil said, the risk. Phil, I can see you champing at the
Yeah, no, sometimes we do clash on stuff. I still think there's a place for having a good quarterly review process.
I didn't say
the scale of the organisation, the scale of the changes, Tony,
absolutely,
that you need to make, and the visibility of the work.
Yes.
But for me, it's not about the plan. It's just more about the planning process.
Mm-hmm.
What did we commit to through the planning processes, but allowing you still need some variability and some flexibility. So you've got agile value, respond to change over following a plan.
Yeah.
But you've got to have a plan first,
Yeah.
or you can't respond to change.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're going to need those things to be lined up.
Well, realistically, when you think about governance as well, like why, if we're trying to be an agile organization, why are people not using agile principles to roll out their governance by involving the customer, being the stakeholders? And you know what I mean? Like at the end of the day, do it the same way, like lead from the front.
Yeah. Yeah. Agile governance is about using the principles and the practices of the Agile Manifesto and values and applying them to the governing systems.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's say that I'm an organization or I'm a manager in an organization and I'm responsible for governance, but it's too far late now. We've already rolled out aspects of Agile and we're thinking about Agile governance as an afterthought and we know we need to improve. What would be one or two things that you would recommend someone start with if they were going to start uplifting Agile governance?
Elevating visibility and transparency of work, changing the way that you ask for information.
Okay.
But that's a really good starting point. So instead of asking for the 50-slide status report once a month, go to the ADO board, go to the Jira board, go to the workflow tool, whatever it is, and ask to see the data. And then ask that gets elevated and ask that becomes visible. Once you've done that, you get transparency. So I think it's sort of aligned with leadership. So how, as a leader, would you ask different questions? You want a different outcome, you've got to ask a different question. I think that's kind of where we end up a lot as well, the conflict between sort of agile transformation and governance is you're asking for the teams to work differently, but then you're holding them to account the same way you used to. So leadership shift is I need to ask different questions of the work in the system and go to the work. So I'm going to go and look at the board. I'm going to have it elevated. I'm going to put it on a wall that I can see. And I'm going to talk to those things and use those data points to actually drive conversation. So they're kind of first movers for me.
And when I walk into organisations and I talk to executive leaders and leaders, the first question I ask, well, there's a couple of questions that I ask immediately. And the first one is, can you tell me your demand versus your capacity versus your ability to deliver for your teams?
Yes.
And you can imagine the answer I quite often get with that. The second thing I ask is, can you show me your single demand view? Are you able to see all of the work that's coming into your organisation, wherever it's coming from, right? Whether it be operational, innovation, CapEx, OpEx, because if you haven't got that, how do you govern the system? You're actually creating what I call an egg timer.
Absolutely.
System where the work just falls through the egg timer and lands on the teams, and then they're expected and the areas of your organisation, whether it be knowledge work, software, it doesn't matter, right? What you're actually looking to do is to understand that. And you know, particularly when organisations been around a long time, they have what we call the donut economy, right? I know Phil likes donuts.
Who doesn't?
Yeah. He likes the chocolate ones. I wander over and I say, mate, can you get this work done for me? It's really high priority. Donuts on the line, or we've been old mates. The problem with that is it damages your system, right? So if you can't see, then you can't make change and you can't govern the system. So there are a couple of the questions. There's a few more, but you know, generally.
Deming, data trumps opinion.
Yep.
It's interesting. I'm going to start bringing donuts to stand-ups, and maybe more people will come along to that. That might be.
You know what's funny? We used to run, when I was back working with software development teams, like we used to have our retros weekly. So retros, I think it was fortnightly sprint, fortnightly retro. It's cake day. No cake, no retro. That's it.
Oh, nice. Nice. I'm going to put that into future agreements. No, I think those examples are really good. Tony, to your point, as a consultant as well, literally the biggest challenge is always that they don't have a demand pipeline view, which sounds so basic. We had one client that we were working with who it was a medium-sized business, and they absolutely did not know what one of the projects that was being reported on. No one in the room of executives, and there was only one executive missing who I believe knew what the project was, knew what that initiative was. And the MD was like, what is this initiative? And nobody knew it. They had all these fancy names for these initiatives. No one knew. So it goes back to both what you said around transparency and obviously that funnel as well. So I can agree with that.
It also goes back to the speed of information flow as well, right? So when I talk to them, how expediently can you get that information, right? And in the middle, when you look at it, all of a sudden you'll find there's 33 steering committees, a dozen cabs, change advisory boards for those who, sorry, I'm throwing out all the acronyms, steering committees, whatever you like, those things that have centralized themselves as the control mechanism, and unwinding those into things like a portfolio, an EPMO, or a portfolio stand-up that allows you to see.
Yes, absolutely.
With real-time availability of data. Again, these organisations, a plethora of data that we see that's not being used. You know, I've worked with an organisation who was imbibing a petabyte of data a day from their systems. Very big organisation, right? A petabyte of data, that's astounding, right? How much do you reckon of that they're actually slicing and dicing and using to make decisions? They're doing all sorts of other things with it. Right?
Probably not much.
No, this is my point, right? And when you ask that of the leaders, they're just looking and going, well, we didn't know we could. So I think that's the other thing that you look at.
And so thinking back of obviously this book you've written together, the Govern Agility book, if there's one sort of key takeaway, perfect. And we'll put a link to the show notes so people can access it, because it was blurry in that nice display feel. Yeah, because your blurred background. Oh, that's clear as day.
Mug.
Love it. You've already got the mugs. That's great. What other than the mug, what would be one key thing that each of you would like people to take away from that book if there was one thing that stood out the most?
Yours, Phil?
What we've tried to do is make it simple to understand. So no matter what kind of work you do, as soon as you've got a reasonable scale organization, there's principles that can apply to you. So I think it's more about the simplicity. You don't want to oversimplify it, because then you kind of think you're doing a disservice. I also think, and we've got this feedback from, I guess, some of the people who've read it today, who know nothing about Agile. It's not about Agile at all. It says govern agility, but it's not. It's actually just about how you actually should govern your work differently. So I think for me, it's just about the simplicity of the messages and the ability just to pick a couple of things up and just start. What's the thing that you think is holding you back today? I don't have a visible system of work or data. Cool, start with that. So I think that for me is probably the key takeaways.
Thank you.
I've got two takeaways. One of those is, I'll take a moment and just tell a little story. When we wrote the book, and we were looking for publishers, we finally settled on a publisher, as people do. And we chose this publisher because they were not one of the big ones, but we felt that they had a very agile mindset and that we could work with them and etc. Right? When the book got to the point of publishing and we were putting in the forwards for the book, that particular publisher wrote a forward. We didn't ask her to do that, and the thing that she wrote in there was that she read the book. She took notice of the examples that we gave in the stanchions and the things that we said in there that you could do to get started, and applied it to her business with an exponential result. Now, again, we didn't ask her to put that in there, and it really shocked us to the point where we actually rang her and said, are you making this up? And so we're talking about a small to medium business. So I think that the takeaway there is that this applies to any kind of organizational construct, whether it be small, medium, or big, or start up, scale up, blah, blah, blah. Start thinking about it, because it's going to affect you, and there are things in there that you can think about. So that's my first takeaway. The last one's in the title of the book. It really, if you're in these modes, if you're responsible, you're thinking about redesigning, you're thinking about doing this, don't put governance in your agile. Use agility in your governance. Don't disenable your ability to use your organizational agility by doing that. That's the key takeaway. And that's why we gave it that tag, really.
Love that. And I think there's a lot to take from the conversation today. I know we didn't get time to talk about your karate story, Phil, which I'm very happy to stay on a few minutes if you want to share it. I'm sure people will get a kick out of it. But yeah, do you want to share?
We'll save it for another time.
All right, let's do that. To be continued. We're going to have a secondary conversation about this. This is been great. Before we wrap up today, and I'll make sure I share the show notes so that you can have people access the book via your website, your new website. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners? A call to action, a piece of advice, or a question to ponder before we wrap up today? Either one of you or both.
Tony.
I just think, even if you don't buy the book, because we're not saying you have to do that, at least just go and have a look at the website and the message appears, but go and look at the messages on the website and see if they actually strike home, because if any of those strike a chord, then it's time to start thinking about how you change it. And don't stand back and just wait and let it be in it. Or if you read the book, and don't let it just be some nice words on a page, go and do something about it, because you do have the ability to make that change.
Sounds good.
Yeah, probably the only one for me is probably governance is not supposed to be static.
Yeah.
So no matter what rules or practices or processes you put in place, you should always be emerging, evolving, and changing them anyway. And hopefully there's some ideas in there that kind of help you in that direction or pathway.
Definitely. Thank you so much to both of you. We'll make sure we link to your LinkedIn page and your website and the book as well in the show notes. But it's been a pleasure having the both of you, and I like the three-way conversation. It worked out really well. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, man. Much appreciated.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Please share this with someone or rate it if you enjoyed it.
Don't forget to follow us on social media, and to stay up to date with all things Agile Ideas, go to our website www.agilemanagementoffice.com. I hope you've been able to learn, feel, or be inspired today. Until next time, what's your Agile idea?